If someone were to travel back 2 decades in the past, they would still hear the name Resident Evil being spoken about so fondly. This series has gone down in the halls of legends in the industry, solidifying itself as one of the best horror games to have ever been created. While open world games have become the norm today, Resident Evil still holds a very solid fan base. And with the Resident Evil 4 remake having just been released in 2023, we thought it would only make sense to dive back through the archives of Metacritic, looking at the top 10 best Resident Evil games to have ever been released. And with that said, if you do like this type of content and you would like to see some more top 10 related videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button and of course, like this video. We do also stream over on Twitch. I will leave all the links within the description box below. And with all that said, let's get into the list. These are the top 10 best Resident Evil games to have ever been released, according to Metacritic. Number 10. Resident Evil 3 The Remake. In a nutshell, Capcom's Resident Evil 3 Remake is a pretty solid addition to this list. Visually, Raccoon City has never looked so good, and the characters' redesigns are fantastic across the board. Staying true to the original version, the Resident Evil 3 Remake is more action-driven than its immediate predecessor in the series, all the while still delivering plenty of scares and tense sequences. That said, this game, in comparison to Resident Evil 2's remake, did feel more like an expansion than an actual game itself. The campaign for this game is disappointingly very short, and loses quite a bit of steam during the second half of the game. Number 9. Resident Evil Village. Building on the success of Resident Evil 7, Village brought back the game's protagonist, Ethan Winters, and its first-person character. With his daughter having been abducted and taken to a European city filled with terrifying entities that seem ripped from another era, Ethan finds himself in a bit of another nightmare. Despite sharing a few things with his predecessor, Village pushes the series back into a more action-orientated direction, and even though it does have a few low points, Village's haunting environment and unforgettable characters help paper over the cracks. Number 8. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. The Resident Evil series had been one note for a number of years, following the release of the 4th numbered entry, requiring Capcom to think a little bit outside the box and deliver an experience unlike any from the franchise. Some comparisons were made between the cancelled Silent Hill games and Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, but the latter was a triumph regardless. Players are dropped into the shoes of Ethan Winters, making them feel as if they are the ones stranded in a hellish household where a vicious family is out to kill them. This game is a definite scary addition to the world of gaming. Number 7. Resident Evil 5. With a lot of action not necessarily being a bad thing, Resident Evil 5 is the best example of Capcom's series adapting to that genre. It replicates the game style of its predecessor, and while it doesn't reach the same heights as Resident Evil 4, this game is still a classic in its own right. It has grand action sequences that fill up the adrenaline line as players go along. The game also adds a worthy partner for Chris Redfield, which proves to be especially welcome when taking part in a fight to the death with the series' antagonist, Albert Wesker. Number 6. Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil put Capcom's horror license on the map, and this sequel announced that the franchise was here to stay. Rather than being confined to an estate, Resident Evil 2 expands things to an entire city, which furthermore the sequel has 2 playable characters who each have their own strategies, greatly enhancing the campaign's replayability. Resident Evil 2 is one of the best PS1 horror games of all time, and while it can be difficult to recommend this game over the 2019 remake, this classic is a must-play for anyone interested in the horror genre. Number 5. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. This game should be attributed for turning Resident Evil firmly on course for becoming an action-orientated series, as Nemesis was lighter on the horror compared to its predecessors. Critics noted this change as well, with not all of them satisfied with the departure from the scares. Gameplay-wise though, things remained more or less the same, but players had to rely more on their firearms than before, as Nemesis aimed to make them an expert marksman for the most part. One of the better parts of the game is your constant encounter with the Nemesis throughout the game, whose sequences amp up the tension. Number 4. Resident Evil. Even though many of the following games in the series replicated the original style, the first Resident Evil is still the best among the bunch. Along with carrying the nostalgia factor, this game is genuinely very chilling to play. It inspired a number of similar titles, while also reviving the horror genre at that moment in the video game industry. The eerie experience of transversing through the mansion's dangerous environments never seems to get old no matter how many decades seems to pass. Number 3. Resident Evil 2 Remake. Resident Evil 2's remake is so good that it overshadows a 1998 version, which is not in itself a very easy thing to do. Featuring the over-the-shoulder perspective that's always been a hit among fans, the remake carried forward the original's horror elements and combined it with the action style that today's gamers want. This game also had one of the best stories in the series and is played by 2 very likable leads, along with a solid supporting cast. The gameplay is about as good as anything the series has ever produced, with Resident Evil 2's Mr. X sections being brilliant. Number 2. Resident Evil Code Veronica. This installment has such close ties to the main series that it was considered as a true sequel by most of the fanbase. After all, the gameplay, story, and everything between are connected directly to the events that came before. The most definitive improvement that critics loved was Code Veronica's dynamic camera, which offered more versatility in gameplay. While before the player was restricted in movement due to the fixed camera angles, they now had the freedom to see more clearly. It was also a much more horror-based Resident Evil game compared to the third main entry. Number 1. Resident Evil 4. If you want to think about groundbreaking, then look no further than Resident Evil 4, which set the standard for action-adventure games to follow to this day and beyond. It revamped the series entirely, while also bringing further characterization to Leon Kennedy, instantly making him the most loved hero in the series. While being mainly an action feature, the game succeeded in being a horror classic, as well as due to the presence of the enemies that will make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. There won't ever be a time where critics won't hail Resident Evil 4 as being one of the greatest games of all time, which justifies the enormous high ranking that it received on Metacritic. And so there you pretty much have it. That were the top 10 best Resident Evil games to have been released of all time, according to Metacritic. So what did you think of this list? Do you agree with this top 10 list according to Metacritic? Or perhaps that you think that there were some Resident Evil titles that weren't on this list that should have been included? If so, do let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. I would love to hear it. And of course, if you do like this type of content and you would like to see some more top 10 related videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button and of course, like the video. I'll also leave some more videos at the end of this one if you would like to check them out. Thanks very much for watching guys, and I will see you all next time.